Welcome, bienvenidos a todos. I am Lorena, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you to our exciting webinar, Women's Equality Day, Path to Women's Equality. A huge shout out to Zeta for sponsoring this month's Latina Track webinar. We're so grateful for your support and for Victor Sanchez, whose support has been instrumental in this partnership. We're incredibly excited to dive into this session organized by Prospanica's Latina Track Committee. Today we will be exploring the significance of Women's Equality Day and its impact on women in the workplace and how to skillfully maneuver through challenges in a career setting. With engaging leaders, a researcher, and inspiring coaches, this discussion is designed to give you a well-rounded perspective and arm you with the confidence and tools you will need to achieve the professional goals while celebrating Women's Equality Day. Without further ado, I am honored to present Victor Sanchez from Zeta, who will kick us off.
Thank you, Lorena, and happy Women's Equality Day. I'm Victor Sanchez, and I work at Zeta, who is sponsoring this event. Zeta is an AR marketing cloud whose focus is to acquire, grow, and retain customers for our clients. You can learn more about our story at zetaglobal.com/about/our story. One of the exciting things about Zeta is their commitment to people and culture. As part of that, I am the co-chair of Zeta Mundo, along with my other co-chairs, Raul Campos and Felipe Soto. We started our ERG a few years ago, and our focus was growing internally. We were looking to find a cadence of events that worked for us, including Hispanic Heritage Month, where we celebrate events on a weekly basis, such as employee featurettes, a cooking show, discussion panels, and a game night, to name a few. You can see some of the fun that we've had in the picture on the right-hand side of the slide. Once we established our ERG internally, we turned our focus to outside of Zeta. So we started seeking out a partner. After deliberating, we chose Prospanica for three main reasons. First, because they're a nonprofit. Second, because anyone can be a member, for either from a college student all the way up to being a CEO. And we wanted to take advantage of their ability to help Zeta grow our Latina membership via recruiting. Once we became partners with Prospanica, they asked Zeta how we wanted to help. We were presented with the Latina track and could not think of a better way to advocate for our Latina members at Zeta. So far, it has been a great partnership. I have attended some of the Latina track events and learned so much already. I'm excited to continue to inspire and motivate our Zeta Mundo members. With that, I'd like to transition to Madeline Flores, who I met at a Prospanica Leadership Conference in Dallas and was so excited to see again today. Madeline will be emceeing tonight's event.
Thank you, Victor. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Saludos a todos. My name is Madeline Flores. I am a current MBA candidate at Tech School of Business with previous experience of gender equity in the workplace. I'm very excited to be moderating today's webinar. Victor, again, thank you so much for sharing, for inviting us, and sharing more about Zeta's mission in supporting the Latina Track Committee. We strongly believe these webinars are equipped to support our Latinas in the workplace. With that said, I'd like us to introduce our expert speakers. So Dr. Cruz, Star Farrar. Dr. Cruz, if you'd like to start. And Dr. Cruz, if you want to come off mute, that'll be great.
My apologies. It's a pleasure to be here today. And just a little bit about me. I'm an executive coach and career development consultant, and I've also been involved in research on Latinas over the last 15 years. And most of my focus has really been on the career and leadership development of Latinas, what gets in the way, and what are the critical success factors. So I'm happy to share some of that with you today.
And hi, everyone. I'm Star Farrar. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm currently Director of Culture and Inclusion at Zeta Global. I lead all of our DEI workplace initiatives, ranging from managing our employee-led groups, which Victor mentioned today. Zeta Mundo is one of our ERGs, creating learning and development opportunities for our employees, and embedding DEI into all of our recruiting processes. As a biracial woman and Afro-Latina, I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation. This is something that I'm very passionate about, both in my personal life and at work. So I hope I can answer all of your questions today. If not, add me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to answer it at a later date. But regardless, I hope you all walk away learning something new today. So thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Star. And we'll get right on into it. Very excited to go through these questions with you both. So, Star, let's start with you. How can women use their voices and platforms to challenge stereotypes and advocate for systemic change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's many different ways in which I can answer it, but I think the main thing that I always, one, I try to live by, but also I try to coach our ERG leaders to also live by in the workplace is to always amplify underrepresented voices. I think when we share our stories and we allow other people to share their stories and we give them the platform to do that, we all come together and we realize we have so many similarities, but yet so many differences. And I think when we all realize that there's a common goal that we all have that may look different in how we approach it, but I think at the end of the day, we all have the same goal. And I think there's, strength in numbers. So when women come together to really uplift each other and really put ourselves out there to share our stories, I think that's very impactful. One thing that I always tell people to keep in mind is intersectionality when we're doing that. We tend to always just elevate those who look like us, maybe share the same beliefs, have the same backgrounds and culture. But when we amplify people who don't look like us, we're allowing the space to not only learn ourselves, but also giving someone an opportunity that they may not have had prior to that experience. I know for me, there have been many times where I walk into a room, I might be the only person who looks like me, and that's okay. That's an opportunity maybe for me to learn something or to teach other folks in the room to learn something. But I think as women, it's important to come together as a community and welcome women of all backgrounds and cultures.
And I just want to first acknowledge that, yes, what Star is saying about the importance of the alliances and partnership and collaboration, because it's really about magnifying those voices and not trying to go it alone. So many times we kind of very quietly try to work hard on something, some effort, but when we can bridge together and amplify our voices in that way. I'm going to share a little bit about my perspective more as a coach and as a scholar, because a lot of the work that I do is with individuals who are encountering some sort of challenge in their career. And I really look at it as there's an individual perspective, that's you and what you're confronting, and also as an industry or within your organization, and then globally. And for a lot of the work that I do as a coach, a lot of it happens where there's some challenge that they're facing, an individual's facing, and that becomes internalized. So, for example, we're talking about stereotypes and bias, or maybe it's something, a lack of mentors or sponsors. And oftentimes that becomes internalized into limiting beliefs or, mindsets or behaviors that tend to perpetuate that. So advocacy, from my perspective, is really starting from empowerment of what can you change, what can you control, what can you influence, because being aware of what's happening is the beginning of empowerment. And once you can recognize that person's bias or stereotype is their limiting belief and not yours, it allows you to take action in that moment rather than to react. So, for example, I work with a lot of Latina attorneys, and they can give you countless examples of how often they're misidentified as someone other than the attorney in all the spaces where they work. And or they're in their office and someone walks up to them and sees their Ivy League diploma and assumes that it's an affirmative action situation. So what do you do with that situation? Do you internalize it to mean that I'm not really good enough, or do you challenge that? Do you counteract that mindset? So with advocacy really begins with recognizing what's going on, being aware, educating yourself of what the reality is. Like, do you know what the status is of Latinas in your industry? I've spent a good part of the last 15 years really trying to amplify that for the legal profession. I write extensively about it. But I'm shocked at how many people don't really know the status of Latinas. There's more and more research coming out. There's certainly not enough, But part of empowerment is knowing what's going on, knowing the reality of Latinas, their status. I know we're going to talk about compensation, so I'll save that. But arm yourself with education and awareness of what's going on.
I love that.
No, I think that's great. And what I'm taking from both of you is almost a framing of the individual actions that we have. I love this point that what can we focus on? What can we change? I had a great mentor who told me imposter syndrome is something that if you air out, you talk to two people about why you think you're there, you'll realize it's not really there. It's like a scar. You got to give it some oxygen. You got to talk through it. And so I love this idea of that individual piece. And then Star, to your point, almost this interpersonal piece, right? Of maybe we hadn't had that opportunity before. And so how might we invite other voices to come along with us? I know that one of my mentors saved me because I thought Goldman Sachs was a gold mining company whenever I started my college degree, and they very nicely corrected me and let me know that not the case, and then helped me find opportunities as well. So I really like these 2 points of almost the individual actions that we can take. But then also, right, if we're able to take some interpersonal actions and ways in which we can uplift others. So really appreciate that. Just want to leave some space if there's anything else for either of you to share. If not, great. So then this is, I think, a big topic for so many in our community and others as well. Really understanding really what are the practical steps that women can take to advocate for equal pay and career advancement opportunities. Dr. Cruz, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, this is one of, it's not my favorite because it's such an issue. And I mean, first of all, let's state the obvious. Latinas are the most underpaid across, and I've researched this on so many industries. I mean, there is little, Lean In, I think, has collected this data, but consistently Latinas are the most underpaid racial ethnic group by gender. So when you look at a Latina versus a white man, there's I think currently, and I think the number is actually higher, is a 57% pay gap, which means that, and also I think it's October 3rd, or maybe it's the 16th this year. I've seen 2 different dates, that a Latina has to work till October 16th of this year, 2024, right, to make as much as a white man on average that would have earned in 2023. I mean, let that sink in. And I see this consistently, again, within the legal profession, that there's an incredible significant pay gap. And yes, there's a lot of institutional barriers that contribute to this, including lack of pay transparency, equal, let's see, 19, I think it was 50 years ago, the Equal Pay Act went into effect, but still there is still disparity. So that's still an issue. But there is one thing, going back to the individual level, that Latinas and women can do to change that. And it's to ask and to advocate and negotiate. First of all, know your worth, right? And there are ways to do that. And then ask for what you want and deserve. Because the reality is that both of those components, it's not enough just to know, but to actually advocate for it. But when you look at some of the cultural inhibitors that play out, it's, I don't want to ask because I don't want to be greedy, or, there's this sense too that I don't, that deference where I don't want to challenge authority. I don't want them to think that I don't trust them. And there's also a component of it it's an assumption that you're being paid what you're actually worth. And so oftentimes when you find out that you're actually being paid less than everyone else, it's a shock and a surprise and a feeling of betrayal. So the reality is, and this is what I'm very passionate about. I actually do a program on authentically helping Latinas authentically identify their worth and negotiate for equal pay. It's amazing the transformation that will happen when they are willing to advocate for themselves by merely just asking, having a willingness to negotiate your initial salary, believe it or not, over a 40-year career can mean more than $1 million in wages differential from not negotiating your pay. There's a lot of data on that. And think about not just you, your family, your community. We're talking about generational wealth. All right, I'm going to stop because this is I'm obviously on my soapbox here, but it's something I feel very strongly about.
Well, I love the rant though, Dr. Joe. I think it's important for people to like understand the data. A lot of times I feel like just saying things, but people aren't actually seeing the statistics and how they fall. How do they make up those statistics? And I agree with everything you said. A few things that I would want to add is, I think, at least for me, and there may be people on the call who would agree with this, but at as a Latina, I was always taught growing up that, you just do your job, work really hard, and you'll get the raise or you'll get the promotion. But the truth of the matter is, like, unless you ask for it, you can't guarantee that your manager or the people on your team or the company that you work for is just going to automatically understand or realize what your impact is and just give you the things that you deserve. Like, that's just not the reality, unfortunately. And as Dr. Jill said, we need to just get comfortable advocating for ourselves. And what I always tell, my friends when they're looking for a new job or they want a promotion is the first step I always tell people to take is make a list of every single thing you've ever done in your entire professional career. Figure out what the major themes are there. Write down every single project you work on in your current role, whether it's something that you're still, it's not finished, but you started it. Every single thing you do, just document every single thing. Because when you're going to go and ask for that raise or for that promotion, you should really lay out what your impact is in numbers. Because unfortunately, people only understand things when it's, laid out in front of them in numbers. And I think that's helped me a ton in my career. It's helped me make a huge career transition. It's helped me, increase my salary by a ton, just being able to advocate for myself and laying out what my impact is and why, this company should advocate for me and why they should give me the numbers that I'm asking for. And then I think in addition to that too, look for mentors, look for sponsors. Um, while I advocated for myself, a lot of that would not have been possible without people who believed in me and listened to me when I was advocating for myself. It doesn't have to be this daunting task of, asking someone to be your mentor, but maybe approaching these conversations more organically, asking them one simple question, going back to them, letting them know how that advice that they gave them either worked or didn't work. I think, believe it or not, people are excited to help. And they're even more excited to know that they did help someone. And I think in that way, you just have a natural, organic relationship with someone who maybe is more senior than you or someone who's in a career that you want. And you have that organic networking relationship. I think we have to be comfortable putting ourselves out there and really building our network as well.
And can I add one more thing? And I think, Star, you said it. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I mean, fundamentally, it's something that if we feel that we're uncomfortable, we're telling ourselves that we're not ready, we're not right, it's not correct. But the reality is that's the key, is you're willing to put yourself out there and be a little bit uncomfortable. I coach clients on negotiating compensation all the time. And one of the things that I say to them is it's going to be a 15, not even a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation where you're going to feel a little sick to your stomach and you're going to want to backpedal and just kind of be comfortable with that, get comfortable with that. And once, when I tell them, when you give them the amount that you want, don't say another word. Don't say another word. It's going to cost you $1,000 for every word that you say after that, because there's this sense of reciprocity that the other person, I was on the other side of this. I was a recruiter and the head of human resources for many years. So I kind of know all the tricks. And if you can understand what's going on in their head, first of all, they expect you to negotiate. When you don't negotiate, first of all, not only do you not get value, but you also are setting an expectation of how you want to be treated. So it transcends more than your compensation. People see that you are someone who advocates for yourself, and especially if you're doing it in a way that's respectful and not threatening, they're going to walk away with this whole new respect for you. And I have never, ever had a client or known anyone that got a job taken away from them or were fired because they asked for what they deserve. So do it.
I think these are great, great points. I had a good friend of mine who was trying to coach me through whenever I was transitioning jobs. And he said, he was trying to put it as simply as possible. He said, is this 10-minute conversation for you worth $10,000? Yes.
Good way of putting
Any
it.
level of uncomfort, yes, it is absolutely worth it. So I really love that perspective. Dr. Cruz, since we have your expertise, I hear this question quite often from a lot of other Latinas and women in my network. This idea of asking and negotiating, right, is something that we need to do. The question of frequency comes up, right? So yes, we know we should do this when we get a job offer, but when we join an employer, what is that frequency of asking, negotiating, kind of really advocating for what you deserve as you stay at that employer?
Yeah. I mean, I think it becomes part of how you are. And I think we have to shift our mindset around what we think we mean or we are when we advocate. You should always be advocating for yourself. And I think there's this mindset that advocating means asking for something that I don't truly deserve, or that I'm bothering, or that I'm annoying. And advocating is prioritizing your interests as well as the company's. And so part of it is always making it a win-win. So advocacy is not about something that I get that I don't deserve or isn't good for the company. You always want to frame it in how it actually serves the company too. So it's the win-win. So it's kind of an approach that you just embody. And it doesn't mean that you have to be going to your boss every 6 months and asking for a raise. Now, if you're underpaid, then you hopefully you would not need to do that every 6 months. But if it's something where you want to establish that you are the type of person that is going to be prioritizing your interests and your values as well as the company's. And the thing is, as a leader and moving into leadership, those are the individuals that get promoted because they recognize that if you're going to do it for yourself, you're going to do it for the company too.
I think it's great framing, and it comes back to Star's point of what's that list of everything that you've accomplished so you know that worth continuously. And then just before we move on, Star, I'm curious, do you see any of this conversation or this almost peer mentorship to help each other write down those accomplishments happen among the ERGs that you're managing? Are you seeing them really kind of coming together, building that camaraderie and supporting each other and advocating for each other?
Not a ton. I think sometimes there's a culture of like people as individuals, we're scared to share like what our salary may be with each other because we're scared of what can come out of that conversation. And that's another thing that I always tell people is ask people who are in the same role as you, ask them how much they make. How will you know if you're underpaid if you don't know like where you stand with your peers? And so with the ERGs, I think a lot of times they collaborate on just making Zeta more inclusive and more diverse. But I think it's still the topic of like salary and all that is still pretty new. And I think it makes some people uncomfortable, unfortunately. And I think that's an interpersonal thing that people just need to dismantle and be comfortable with just talking about those things because as communities, we can't get further if we're not being open. So
I love that. And Star, I'm so glad you said that because I think there's this inherent belief that that is against policy, that it's taboo. And back in my day, it was, but that is actually one of the number one ways to overcome this pay secrecy, which is part of the institutional barrier that we were talking about, is sharing it, sharing what you earn, and making it transparent, because then you're basically holding the company accountable. So companies that have open, there's different levels of transparency and open systems, but that's really the goal with these open systems, is that you don't have that secrecy, and so that people are actually know why are people paid a certain way, and they make it a little bit more objective and transparent.
Yeah, exactly. And just to add to that too, I think as far as like the ERGs and Zeta, while those conversations necessarily around like compensation and stuff aren't happening, a lot of times I'm the one that's really advocating for the ERGs to get the recognition and on like what they deserve at the end of the year, because I think some people are just scared again to like advocate for themselves. And it's a lot of work to run an ERG. So at the very minimum, I try to just make sure that their impact is being seen and it's being communicated. And so I think it's just something that we're working towards year by year.
Well, it's a wonderful example of that platform that you're using, right, to uplift others and see systemic change. So it's really wonderful. It's really wonderful to hear, Star. So another good question here. What role does education play in empowering women to achieve equality, and how can women support educational initiatives?
I'm happy
I'll
to
let
go.
either of y'all kick us off on that one.
I think actually Dr. Jill covered a lot on education in the first question. I think one of the biggest things that she mentioned too was, how can we diagnose the problem if we don't have the basic knowledge of what that issue is? Like, it's 2024, there's a term for every single possible issue these days. And I think that's really helpful because it helps us diagnose it, identify the problem, and figure out ways to really solve the issue or dismantle systemic racism or inequities, whatever that may look like for us as individuals or as a Latin community. But I think for me personally, like being able to read a ton of books on historical events or learning about systemic racism in America really helps paint the full picture. And I think not having all that knowledge, one, it would be really hard for me to do my job and really show up as a DEI manager, but also just thinking about like, how can we fully see the full picture if we don't understand what is going on? How can we approach a conversation if we don't know how to properly articulate what it is that we have an issue with? And so I think education plays a huge, if not like the most important piece in making sure that we can reach equality as women.
And I'll add too I mean, education it's one of the pillars, and formal education in particular, because it is the pathway to advocacy. Because, and again, because I work with primarily attorneys, so many of them talk about education in the research that we did. Second to families, the influence of family, education was really one of the critical success factors to them to reach the place, to have a different life, to transcend poverty. And oftentimes they're first gen, and oftentimes their parents didn't have the formal education, or nor did they have role models for that. So being able to move into those spaces where they had influence and they could advocate and they could create policy, that all started with having access to education. Oftentimes very serendipitous for them, they didn't have I mean, I've got a college student and a high school senior, and they have access to all the resources to attend, great schools. Many of these women didn't have any of that. They didn't have mentors. They didn't have someone to guide them. And through that research, we really identified that one of the critical success factors were the pipeline programs that were reaching out to Latina youth in um, as early as elementary school, or as early as we possibly could, because that made the difference. That was where they could start developing those critical skills that allowed them to move into college and then beyond. Because quite frankly, high school is too late, especially at the level that you need to be in some of these colleges. So the importance of both those pipeline programs and the critical role of role models and mentors. So reaching back and reaching out to Latina youth, not just in terms of education, but also influence. So many of the Latina attorneys in our research identified another Latina who was someone that they saw by happenstance, who they saw them and saw what they could become. And by learning about their pathway, they decided to move in that direction. So really can't underestimate the importance of Latinas reaching back to other Latinas and being involved in helping to influence them and encourage and help them navigate that process. Trust me, I mean, as a mother of two children who are going through it now, it's a lot. And if you haven't had that experience yourself, it's even more, it's another layer that you have to navigate.
Yeah, I also want to add to that too. You mentioned the pipeline programs. Like when I was in school, I didn't know anything about pipeline programs or mentorship programs. And like when, working at Zeta, I volunteer a ton with the ERG leaders on like just working at different organizations to help mentor students who are either in high school or in college on like resume writing, mock interviews. And these are all resources that either didn't exist when I was in school or I just didn't know about them. And had I known about them, what I could have been able to accomplish much sooner in life is a lot different than, how my career trajectory played itself out. But I think those are really important, and like just seeking that information out is huge.
No, I think it's great points. Those mentors are what really help us become who we become and where we go. And something that was shared, Star, that you said is, how can we diagnose a problem we're unaware of? And I think this is where allyship comes top of mind for me, especially when I think about our ERGs. It was very interesting to see in Lean In's Women in the Workplace report. What's been shown is that more white employees are saying that they see themselves as allies to women of color. It's something like 80 to 90%. But when we ask about the actions, it falls. The actions that are taking of mentoring, of learning about these, learning about different underrepresented identities and barriers, we're not seeing that as much. When we think about your ERGs, are you seeing a difference in kind of demographics for different employee resource groups showing up? Is it only, Latinos going to the Hispanic Latino ERG? Are you seeing additional people go because they want to practice allyship? Curious if you've seen any change in the past few years there.
Yeah, so I think for one, our employee demographic is mainly South Asian and Caucasian. So naturally, with our ERGs, we have a ton of allies showing up to a ton of our events. And every ERG, there's some level of an allyship, either training or event that they host throughout the year, because that's the majority of our employee demographic. So that in turn is a majority of our ERG leaders. And I think one thing that I always, or we as a group try to educate people on is allyship isn't you just join this event and you're done and like your job, is done. It's something you have to do every single day, right? And as much as we are advocating for DEI, we're not perfect and we all make mistakes. And so making sure that before we either say the wrong thing, like, are we just asking people first the question of, is this a conversation you even want to have? Which is why we make sure like our ERG events are open to everyone, because we want to make sure that people can walk away, no matter whether you identify with the group or you don't, you can walk away with something that can then help you tomorrow even. So that's where we are with our ERGs.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, I totally agree with what Star says, is it's something that you have to do every day. I mean, I consider myself an ally, and it's something that it's something that has become my purpose and my passion, but it started with allyship, and really becoming involved in really understanding deeply what was going on, and to challenge my own implicit bias and my own assumptions, which I think is something that you have to do if you're going to be an ally. You can't be afraid to have those vulnerable conversations. So if anyone who's listening is interested in, I'd be happy to talk with them with my experience. But it's been incredibly rewarding.
I think that's great. And I always appreciated someone had said if we have biases if our brain is working, right? It's making those snap judgments. All of us fall into those bias traps, but it's being aware of them and then being active against them. So I think it's a great way of putting that. So thank you so much, Dr. Cruz and Star, for an enlightening conversation, going through those questions together. It's great when we can explore a range of strategies and personal stories that highlight the importance of Women's Equality Day. So it is the time, the moment where we get to actually open up our Q&A to the audience and get some live questions coming in. So if you are with us, this is your time to connect with our amazing panelists, get your questions answered directly. Don't hold back. Let us know what's on top of your mind, as we have these incredible experts. And we'd love to be able to pick their brain. With that shared, we do already have a few questions that have been asked in the chat. And so the first one that I'll give to both of you, and you can start off whoever feels best, is what are small actions we can take daily to support gender equality? I love this. Small actions daily to support gender equality.
Good question. I think for me, when this was a journey that I decided to embark on, and just educating myself on, like, what does DEI mean? How can I make a difference in the workplace? The first thing was just educating myself. So with gender equality, like, it wasn't that long ago that women weren't able to vote, right? And I think we need to just go back into history and figure out what are the accomplishments that we've made thus far, but what are the areas in which we still have a long way to go. And I think that's huge, because a lot of times when we learn about history in school or we read about it, it feels like the tone is like, oh, this was a very, very long time ago, but it really wasn't. It was not that long ago. And I think people need to, I think that's important, because history has a tendency to repeat itself, right? So are we seeing any of those actions or themes coming up again? And I think the only way to really dismantle that and really be able to push for a more equal world and society is to figure out, how far have we come? Where are we today? And where do we need to still go tomorrow to really reach full equality?
Yeah. I think this question is really the core for me as to why I found myself moving down this path, because I was in a large law firm, and we were losing women, not just women of color, but women. And it was one of those situations where the firm just didn't understand what was going on. And they just made assumptions. Well, they're going to have children. They're leaving because of, they're getting married. It was crazy. I mean, when you think about it now, some of the things that were actually said, even though I'm sure they're still perceiving that, nobody questioned that. Nobody really challenged that assumption. And so what happens, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I knew when I left the firm, there was just something about this. I wanted to understand root cause. What Star was saying is really just understand deeply what was going on. And that's really led me down the path. So in answer to the question is, learn as much as you can. There's some really great books out there on some of these gender-based differences and experiences and marginalization. It's not always what you think. Sometimes by understanding it and unpacking it, you can begin to see it within yourself. Like, how are you internalizing some of this? And even though we may think that we aren't, I mean, I consider myself a feminist, but I still fall into the trap. I mean, I'm the one doing the dishes and and not even questioning my husband on this. So part of it is, recognizing what are you doing that's reinforcing this? And then the more you can be aware of that, how can you advocate and support other people in your other women in your environment, in your workplace, in your community? So it begins with, I think, just a deep understanding of yourself and what's going on.
Yeah, agree with that. Because once you have that understanding, it's easy to pinpoint the moment in which inequality starts to take place. Like it happens all the time, but unless you're looking for it, unless you really understand how it shows up, it would be impossible for you to really approach it or I don't want to say call someone out, but maybe educate someone else on how they may not be being equal or inclusive. And the only way to do that is to just be able to pinpoint it. But the only way to pinpoint it is to learn about it and be able to see it when it's happening.
As a funny aside here, someone just recommended that I watch Bridgerton. And I think I'm like 3 episodes in. I'm so horrified.
I haven't watched it.
Ruin it for anybody, but you'll understand. It's related to what we're talking about. Just the plight.
And something I really appreciate that you said there, Dr. Cruz, is being aware of it ourselves. And I remember, I don't know if either of you have taken this or anyone watching has, but there's something called, and I was just looking up in the background, it's the implicit association test that Harvard has. And that's a great tool to help us, right, understand what are some of those biases that we're internalizing, some of those stereotypes. So I think it's a great tangible to take from here if you're wondering, well, what might I be holding? That test is really eye-opening for somebody who felt like they were very educated. The other action that I always try and leave people with as a very non-confrontational person is just the question, well, why do you say that or why do you think that? And now I'm back in my classes and we're having some more, women professors, and I'm hearing a lot of gendered language. And so I simply ask, my classmates, well, why do you say that? Why are you specifically using the word mean to explain her teaching style? Let's unpack that. And sometimes it allows the other person, right, to get to where they need to go. So small actions, right, that we can take on those daily basis. Another great question in the chat here that we received is how can young people get involved in the fight for gender equality?
This might be a bit controversial, but I think, a lot of times when we're talking about DEI, the feedback is, well, let's not be political. Let's not get into the political conversations, but to really see systemic change when it comes to gender equality is really sometimes comes down to policies. And in order to really make a change is one, fully understanding what your options are during the voting season, right? Understanding who you would be voting for, understanding what policies are these politicians aiming to achieve or not achieve. And then I think, a lot of times there might not be politicians that you necessarily agree with or want to vote for. So what are the things that are missing when it comes to like society and when it comes to just US politics as a whole? I think a lot of times people think like, we can change certain things in the workplace or, wherever the case, but a lot of what's being said politically impacts what happens in the workplace. It impacts how people show up every day. It impacts the beliefs that people have and how comfortable they feel voicing those beliefs. And I think in order to really reach full equality, we need to just really start thinking about that. And I think in addition to that, there's many organizations that young people can volunteer with to really make a change. Um, I wouldn't say like, I wouldn't suggest just protesting or doing anything like that, but I think there's many different ways in which people can get involved, and whether it's texting certain numbers to get your governors to listen to you, or it's not giving up when it comes to like your school district and fighting for whatever school policies might exist there, that may have to do with DEI, may have to do with gender equality. I know you've all seen the news, you know what's going on. So I think that those would be ways in which people can get involved and really make a difference.
Yeah. I agree 100% with Star. My answer is a little bit more personal because I have a soon to graduate a senior, and she has already experienced gender inequality in her spaces, which are a microcosm, right? And I think a big part of it, and what I'm trying to do and help her, is to recognize and to use her voice and to use her actions. And looping back to what we said before, where can you step outside your comfort zone? What is within your control, first of all? Control what's within your control to change or influence, and where can you lean in there, where her tendency maybe has been to, this is the status quo, and do I accept it or do I make a small step to change it? And I think even younger, when you said young, maybe some of you were thinking, oh, when I'm out into the workforce, but it really starts very young for women, where we start to internalize, our power and our agency. And so the younger you can to start using your voice, to using your actions, to empower yourself, to advocate for yourself, that's really how we build that momentum, because the status quo is pretty tough to break. It's been in place for as long as I've been in practicing, and even beyond. It hasn't changed. And I think that my hope is that the future generations are going to be the change that we want to see. We're already seeing that more women are, graduating from college. We know there are more women, and actually Latinas are the third largest cohort of law school students, by the way. So we see that there's a change that's happening at the grassroots level. And hopefully that momentum will continue if we continue to encourage and empower them to do so.
I think that's great. No, I definitely think that's great. Thank you both for sharing that. I think we'll have time for one, maybe two more questions. We're going to see how we can go through this. The first one here is somebody sharing, for Dr. Cruz, really loved your point that you made on recognition being important in order to take action, and that they could really identify with that. Do you have a moment that you can recall where you recognized it for yourself? What did you think about it after it happened?
A moment where I recognized something and I needed to take action for myself. Oh, let me think about that for a minute. I mean, there have been so many. I have to pick one. I'll make it maybe a little bit broader. Recognition for, and maybe part of this I'll talk about when I started my coaching business. I think there was this recognition that I was holding myself back because I felt I wasn't quite ready. Like I needed more credentials. Like I already had a lot of credentials, but I told myself that I just wasn't quite ready to put myself out there. Maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome. I'm not sure. I think it was, but and I'll tell you the story now that it's coming to me. I had coffee with a woman who was a very successful six-figure coach back in the day. And I had just finished earning my PhD. I had a couple different certifications under my belt, and I thought, well, I wasn't quite ready to put myself out there. And I met with her, and I expected her to tell me that she had written like 5 books, had 20,000 degrees. And she told me that her formal experience was she was a high school teacher. She had a degree in English, and she just decided one day that she was going to be a coach. And so she just did it. And she said, I worked hard, but 2 years later, she is one of the most sought after, or was at the time one of the most sought after coaches. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, when are you going to dive in? The water has been ready for you for a long time, but you're standing on top of that diving board, looking at that water, thinking that it's so far and so dangerous. You just need to jump in. And it was really that moment that turned a switch for me, and I did. And ever since then, whenever I'm facing something that I think is, I'm not quite ready, I remember that moment. And kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, I embrace the discomfort and I do it anyway.
I love those words. That's amazing.
Wonderful. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I do love that phrase. And the stat that always comes to mind for me is that men will apply for jobs where they have about 60%, right, of the job requirements needed, and women wait until we have 100%. So I really appreciate that story. I know that we are about to be at time here, so what I'd like to do is just take a moment, share some of the takeaways that I've gotten from this call. Let both Star and Dr. Cruz add any that you'd like to leave with the audience as well. But starting with, I really appreciated this when we think about advocating for ourselves. I think a great frame that you share, Dr. Cruz, is it's setting an expectation of how you should be treated. I think that is brilliant, right? We are setting an expectation of how we should be treated when we think about advocating for ourselves from the start. And making sure that when we do advocate, we should frame that as a win-win. It's something we deserve. It's something that's good for the company, right? I think those are really great takeaways when it comes to advocating. And then Star, something you shared is that as communities, we cannot go further without being open. When we learn something, when we recognize something, we need to share that with our community so we as a whole can continue to go further. I thought that was great. When we think about allyship, I think something that we took from that is 2 key words that go with it: active and consistent. It is not a destination. We need to be active, consistent when it comes to allyship. And then we also want to think about, right, what are we doing that reinforces some of those gender stereotypes that we know exist? When we're thinking about, the role of education, how we can make a change, what are some of those, some of the actions that we're using to reinforce some of those gender stereotypes? And I think the last phrase that you've just shared with us, Dr. Cruz, that I will take as this session is, just jump in. I think that is a great 3-word summation of something that we can all live by, right? It's just jump in. If there's anything else I missed for key takeaways, Star or Dr. Cruz would love for you to share.
The only thing I will add is a lot of this work, we can't do it alone. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and, advocate for yourself.
And I would add that just jump in, you're going to feel self-doubt. And by the way, that's normal. That's your brain just trying to keep you safe. It doesn't mean that you're not ready. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It means that you're stretching and growing. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. So if you need an additional motivation, pick up one of her books. It's all about, being vulnerable and putting yourself out there. So good luck.
Phenomenal. Well, thank you both so much. I will pass on over to Lorena.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Madeline, Dr. Jill Cruz, and Star for sharing your insights on interpersonal experiences. As we wrap up today's webinar on Women's Equality Day, Paths to Women's Equality, we want to give a huge shout out to all of you for joining us. Your enthusiastic participation has truly made this session successful and incredibly impactful. A special thanks goes to Prospanica National for their unwavering support and leadership in making this event possible. Their commitment to empowering Latinas in the workplace is nothing short but inspiring. We are pleased to announce that our next webinar will be on Cultural Showcase for Hispanics Heritage Month and will be held on September 24th. We hope you will join us for another enriching session. Also, don't forget to mark your calendars for our national conference scheduled from October 29th to October 31st in Orlando, Florida. It promises to be an outstanding event with numerous opportunities for learning, networking, and professional growth. And to support all of our Latinas attending the conference, the Latina Track is hosting a pre-conference webinar series, so be sure to tune in. Once again, thank you all for participating.